What do you get when you take a former manager plus report combo, who are now real life friends, one a management coach and sudden viral internet star who shoots from the hip, and the other a CX exec turned advisor who overthinks everything? This podcast. Welcome to the business of humans. I'm Joe, founder of CX Joe Advisory and the Overthinker. My partner in crime is Lynda. She's the founder of Leveled Up Leadership and the Internet Star. Join us as we talk about business, relationships, humanity, success, and also failure through the lens of friendship, heaps of radical transparency and honesty, and zero BS. Let's get started with today's episode.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hey, Lynda. I'm doing great. This is an example of podcast recording where Lynda and I have already been chatting for quite a bit. Have a little bit of a hard time just jumping on our Zoom and just pressing record because we like to catch up and chat a little bit, which is nice.
We do. I have to tell you, I think my favorite line in the intro is the heaps, like throwing in heaps. I think that word
Okay,
is underused.
thank you. Okay, so actually, so Linda and I have, this divide and conquer thing going. Most things related to getting this podcast launched would be all Linda's credit. And Lynda, as the captain of the ship, did ask me to help draft the intro. So I very much appreciate that compliment. And as with anything, there's like a long backstory to. I was wrestling with whether to write heaps or tons, which tons would be much more common, especially here in the States. But I did do that semester in Sydney, Australia, Lynda,
Yes.
20 some years ago. And I think that heaps is like a little subtle nod to my love for Australia. One of my best friends is from that experience. So she's like Australian America now. She still says Australians love saying heaps and I love saying heaps. Underused for sure.
I think it is underused, but I do think it's a way of connecting with people outside of
Yeah,
our immediate circles, right? So I
there you
love
go.
that. And again, I appreciate a good word. Um, I was telling my daughter the other day that, I probably need to like make some merch. I know that you have some merch. I think you have some merch on today,
Oh,
right?
Linda, thanks for the setup. Look at
Yeah,
me,
I
just
love
bigger
that.
and bigger ego, just having fun over here, Linda. I got
I
the
love it.
shirt, I got the sign. Why not?
I was saying that I really need to maybe come up with some merch, right? And like probably have something that says like, "Are you ready for the truth?" Because I think that that's something that I use a lot. But the other phrase that I use a lot that I think is underutilized is by the by, right? So
By
I'll be
the
like,
by.
"Oh, the other day, oh, and I spoke with so and so by the by," right? I
Mm-hmm.
like to really throw that in. So she was not amused.
I
She did not.
remember that. You're totally giving me like the immediate flashbacks to however many years ago it was, our first handful of conversations at Daily Harvest. Because what happens is eventually you get used to it, so you stop hearing it as much. But you just reminded me of like our first months working together, and we're like, I would kind of like my head would like cock the side. I'm like, did you just say by the by? It's kind of endearing, huh? And then you just like keep saying it, and then I started to, what does it mean?
It's kind of like by the way, by the by, right? But I
Yeah.
try I try and like put like little Linda isms, and it's really funny. I think a lot of people who've worked with me, I'll get a random reach out from somebody, and they'll be like, "Damn it, Linda! Like you just came through my soul, and I said something that you
Hmm.
would have said." And I'm like, "Oh, you're welcome."
I
I
love
talk a
that.
lot. We talked last week offline about the phrase I use, like, "Is your backyard clean?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, what does that even mean? And I'm like, I don't know. It's a Lindaism. It just means like we're not hiding stuff. We're like being transparent. We're doing the things. So maybe I need that for my merch as well.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally see that. I mean, the backyard clean, I just immediately picture where there's the so-called bodies buried in the backyard. I don't know if that's intentional, but that's where my mind goes. And, on the topic of your brand and just all of these things, how on brand is it that your name is spelled with a Y? You were like on brand and just that little bit, different and special and extra even at birth, Linda.
Yeah, I guess my parents really thought that one through, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
They, they really thought that one through. I complained about it a lot as a kid, right? And anytime
Mm,
we'd go on vacation, uh, and try and find things. like the nameplates. We'd be at Disney and I wanted a nameplate. And I think my parents, maybe they really did it on purpose so they didn't have to buy me things. Right. So we never went any place where there was a license plate that said Lynda. In fact, the only time I've ever found something Lynda with a Y was when I was in New York City.
Wow.
And there was a Statue of Liberty magnet, and it was Lynda with a Y. And so, of course, I immediately purchased
Yeah, I
that.
could see that because some of the souvenir shops in New York, I mean, some have your standard like 50 or 100 options, but some of these shops, like they've got it all. They probably have like 500 options, and then that included the Linda with a Y. But did your parents or friends or anyone in your life ever get you something that had Linda with an I and just kind of like with a shrug of the shoulders of like, does this work? Is it close enough?
No, because
Good,
I
good.
think even since birth, they knew that I would just not allow that.
You wouldn't have taken to that very well. Okay.
I would have just said, like, I appreciate this. No, thank you.
No,
This is
thank
not
you.
for me.
Pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pass. Faxies. Okay. Got you. Got you.
So I think this is actually kind of a good segue into our topic today. And I think this was just a natural segue. We didn't prep for any of this.
I'm glad somehow you
Um,
think it was a good segue.
somehow and I think like when we think about the spelling of your name, right? Like
Hmm.
that has been a challenge for me through my entire career.
Mm,
Because and people always misspell it, and it's amazing. They type out the email address and then they still misspell it in the body of an email.
hmm, hmm.
But I think this actually really talks about our topic today, and the topic that we've chosen for today's podcast is one that's near and dear to my heart,
Yes, it is.
um, because I think I'm still reeling from trauma from it. So we're talking about toxic workplaces today
Hmm, hmm.
and really kind of unpacking that. And Joe, I know that you have some battle stories to tell.
For sure.
So, but I really kind of want to dive into this concept of toxic workplaces. And I'm not going to lie, I actually think that toxic is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot.
Hmm.
And I think it's misused. The same, and I'm probably on the wrong side of history for this one, but I did go to elementary school in the 80s and 90s. So, the other word I think gets thrown around is bully, right? Like I think
Hmm.
that sometimes it gets very loosely used. And so, and as I've gone on this journey, this social media journey, I guess I should mention what the journey is.
Lots of
I
journeys
get,
that we're on.
yeah, I get a lot of people commenting on toxic workplaces. And I've put out a lot of content about toxic
Mm,
workplaces. So I do think it might be worthwhile to talk about, like, let's define a toxic workplace. And I think as I define this, you and I may have like an aha moment of we may have worked someplace together that fell into some of this thing,
wow.
right?
Shots fired
And
already.
I know it's bad, but I think it's really important to call a spade, right? And so I want to kind of define this for the listeners and the watchers. Um, and I want to talk about, kind of how we may have survived those places or times we didn't survive those places. So I'm going to read because I want to be very specific here. So I went on down the rabbit hole and I looked for information about toxic workplaces. Again, because it's really important if we're going to call something a name, we should be using the correct name, like Lynda with
Mm,
a Y.
mhm.
See how I brought that
I
real
like
full
that. Yeah.
circle.
Yeah.
Uh,
Connected threads there. That's good.
so, common signs of a toxic workplace is you're going to have leadership problems. And this is embedded in the culture. So it's not just an isolated incident or an isolated leader. This is a common thread with the majority of the leaders, not all of them, the majority of the leaders. So you're going to have things like micromanagement is very common with all of the leaders. Fear-based management, right? So threatening your jobs, dangling, you're going to get in trouble for X, Y,
Hmm,
or Z, right? Fear
hmm.
based. Favoritism or clicks, gaslighting, of course, right? So those are kind of common traits when you've got that at the leadership level. And truthfully, you can have a toxic leader and not work in a toxic environment.
Hmm.
This is coming from the broad scope of leaders. And you find this in hiring practices when they're hiring leaders to fit certain personas, right? And and we'll talk a little bit more about some indications that you'll see early red flag warnings, right? So some of the another core indicator is communication. So pervasive office gossip, especially when your leaders are contributing to that.
Mm-hmm.
Information hoarding. So
Interesting.
withholding information to maintain power or to keep people subservient. So that everybody gets a little piece of the information, everybody gets a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody gets a full story. I don't know if any of this is ringing true for you, Joe, but I was twitching a little on
A
some.
ton of it. Yeah, I'm definitely reacting to it. I'm definitely feeling a little bit triggered by a lot of this. Okay, okay, keep
Yeah.
going. Oh, and Lynda,
Um,
one quick
yes.
follow up as I was listening, taking a few notes here. Not to put you on the spot too much, but how do you define gaslighting? There could be somebody listening who isn't really sure what that means or what that means in this context.
Sure. I think another term that's really become popular and is thrown around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, gaslighting is a way of trying to change the reality of the situation or trying to change the actual events.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe you were in a meeting and you had a leader come unglued and have a temper tantrum, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
shockingly happens quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person's like, no, I didn't. I never behaved that way. That's not a thing that I would do, right? And you're like, no, I sat in this room and I watched you have a come apart, and now you're changing this thing. Or you were given very clear directions, and oftentimes it's documented. So you were given like, here's what we believe are the main focuses of your job, right? Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go into a meeting and it's like, no, you're supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z. You're supposed to be doing these things. Okay, but I understand that these were my core functions. No, it's not. You must have misunderstood, right? So it's a lot of times when you are constantly the person who's misunderstanding or mishearing,
Uh,
or the dialogue is changing that way, right? So those are clear indications of gaslighting.
and if it happens enough, you probably start to question yourself and your own sanity or recollection of things.
Yes. Yes.
Reminds me of the book 1983, George Orwell. I was an English major after all, a pitiful English major, but the whole concept of doublethink.
Isn't it 1984?
Did I just in one sentence call it 1983 and say that I was an English major? I did quickly follow up to say that I wasn't really a very good English major, but I was born in 1983, so that's why I always get them confused.
Yes.
Is
Fair
that
point.
allowable now?
Yeah, fair
Are you
point.
going to edit that part out?
I don't know. We can.
Okay, I have a feeling you're not. All right. So anyway, so in the book
Listen, if it makes you the most comfortable, I
1648,
absolutely will.
so in the book in the year 2189, there was a concept called doublethink, and it was just this whole idea of like this thing happened, and then just kind of all these various tactics of the totalitarian government to convince people no, that absolutely didn't happen. So it's really interesting that in modern times it's like a little bit of gaslighting is what's
Yeah.
being invoked there. Okay, all right, all right.
I'm
Okay,
actually
so
really grateful for that synopsis of the book because I tried reading it and I couldn't.
definitely
I
don't
could.
trust me. I don't even know what it's called, so don't take my word for it.
It's fine. It's fine. And then, okay, so the third core indicator is work culture. So an always on expectation,
Hmm.
meaning like, first of all, it's very performative. So you are someone who has to constantly meet the performance expectations, and not the performance expectations as in KPIs, as in personality performance,
Yeah.
right? So you're not allowed to be negative. I talk a little bit about toxic positivity. We're only allowed to say positive things about the business, never anything where we feel like there could be some changes or some alterations or failures of the business. Also this idea of no boundaries, right? And I think that that's become more and more common with since COVID, of people always kind of being on or being available in Slack or Teams or whatever program their company's using. But this concept of like, you always have to be available to me, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then a culture of blame where mistakes are punished rather than used for learning. Again, like that's a really, if it matters more about who we can point the finger at versus what's the core issue,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really big red flag. And then high employee turnover. And I'm going to take this one a step further for the high employee turnover. High employee turnover, especially in a management level.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll talk a little bit about my experience and at previous roles. But when you have like people that are brought in to be supposed experts in their field,
Mm-hmm.
and they come in and they try and like alter the business, or they try and up level the business, or they try and like make changes within the business, and suddenly they're not a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the things that I know about recruiting and the costs of recruiting and the time that it takes to recruit, to spend time on even mid-level management, right? Entry-level management doesn't cost as much, but a mid-level manager, you're almost spending 2x their salary just to recruit them and get them onboarded.
It's powerful. It's crazy.
That's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
To bring them in and then suddenly for them to not be a good fit. And Joe, I know that you know what the interview cycle looks and feels like on a mid-level or executive level. Like it's a lot. It's not just you show up in a room and you're like, "Hey, would you like to hire me?" And they're like, "Yeah, let's do that." Like you go through a ton of tasks. So you think about all of the salaries in the room, all the people who had to sign off with you. And I won't lie, there are some people, I'm excellent at interviewing, so there's some people who will like squeak through and you're like, how did this person get
Mm-hmm.
through?
Mm-hmm.
Which now makes me question my existence on a whole other level. But it's not an easy task, and then just to have that kind of turnover where you
Right.
really see that turnover. And I think you also see turnover on an entry level or lower level. So you have people who cycle through, and it's because your mid-level, your executive leadership is so toxic and the culture is so toxic, it's all trickled down, right?
Yeah.
um and so that's where I think like that's where you can kind of see these red flags, right? When you're looking through and you're vetting companies to go work for, or maybe you're in them, or maybe you're like me and you are looking back on some of the places you've worked and you're like, holy moly, how did I survive that? That was
Yeah,
intense.
for sure, for sure. So many thoughts as always. I mean, I want to jump back to that in a second. One thought that I want to share is it's interesting going through your list, and I was taking some notes because it helps me to, and just helps, to internalize and kind of think on everything. And I'm looking at the list, and a lot of them I think are the root causes of then when we talk about high employee turnover, especially at the management level, I think that's the impact, right? That's kind of how it manifests. To your point, for somebody trying to figure things out from the outside in the interview process, that might be something you could ask either direct questions about or get a sense of on reviews websites, or if you know people who work there and it's maybe something to ask, because that is likely the result of all of the different components of a toxic workplace that you called out earlier. But the other point that I'm eager to make is that, I love how you jump to a definition here and kind of rallying around what does this mean. I think we should also acknowledge that there've got to be sort of levels. This is not an absolute thing. There's got to be levels of toxic workplace. Case in point, you brought up how, in some ways, our shared experience, maybe we sort of survived, aspects of a toxic workplace. And do you know what my first thought was to that? I worked a couple of places since then, and I was like, oh, that was nothing. But that goes to show you it doesn't invalidate what you mentioned and the aspects of that workplace that might have been toxic. It means that I've experienced more toxicity since then. And then someone listening, maybe experienced 5x of what I even experienced, which is getting pretty scary, by the way. But there's got to be levels to this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think, everything in life is a spectrum. And I think that there is a spectrum of like, where is it? Where does it sit on there? I also believe it's can be very department dependent, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you and I have made our careers in
Yeah.
customer experience, customer support, customer service, whatever we're calling it anymore. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many words.
Just check out
CX,
the sign in back of me.
right
CX.
there. So we've made our home there. And I think that you can have like a very toxic CX department just in general. But I think that you can also, if you have really good leadership, because CX is an island. It truly is an island.
Yeah.
It is and I mean, I think any department can really make this same argument, but it's this space where you're living in several different worlds. You're not just living in your one function. You are living in product, you're living in marketing, you're living in sales, you're living in sometimes accounting. I mean, geez, I can't tell you how many times like customer like credit card disputes sits in CX and I'm like, that makes no sense, right? You're sitting in so many worlds, right?
Yep.
But you're still very much an island. And it's because like so many people are like, just you guys just do what you want to do. And as long as things are going well in CX, as long as you have relatively happy customers, as long as, the business is doing okay, a lot of the blame doesn't fall on CX, right?
That's interesting.
There's a ton of attention. Like when things are going poorly or customer reviews are bad, there's a lot of focus on CX.
Yeah.
But in general, if you've got a good product, you've got a good team, like you're relatively kind of isolated, I think, so often from the business. And when I think about our shared experience, yes, there were certain things that we were held accountable for. And yes, there were certain things that came up in meetings. But in general, we were not the topic of the conversation most of the time,
Hmm.
right? It was about like product, it was about marketing, it was about PR, like it was about all of those things. And so I think back to our experience, and I would love your opinion on this. And I think it also sits on your leaders too. And,
Hmm.
not to toot our own horns, but I think like you and I are deeply empathetic. We care about our people and we take a ton of pride in our work. And I used to call myself the umbrella. I was like, sure, rain on me. I'll protect my team. Like I will shelter you from like all of these politics. And I would say that even though I felt a certain way, especially once I left and like took the rose colored glasses off, and I went, holy moly, how did I get like, wow. I would say that I think that the people who reported through me and up to you, I don't think that they felt that same way. Right. And I think that is that us enabling? Probably. It's
Hmm.
probably us enabling. It's, I think, a form of survival at that level, right? The level that we were at.
Yeah.
Uh, but I do think that you can still have that culture and you can still protect the people underneath you by doing your best to create a very transparent organization, an empathetic organization, an organization where you're accessible, but also like honor boundaries. So,
100%. It's interesting. And I was thinking about the way that each of us spend the rest of our days when we're not recording the podcast. And again, there's a lot of overlap, but then there's some differences too. And I know you spent a lot of your time um, coaching individuals, coaching managers, coaching team members. And I have some overlap, but then part of what I spend my time on is coming into these gigs where it's sort of rehabbing, the support or the CX function and thinking about, I always think of it as like step one is to make sure the support is 10 out of 10, but then step two and the harder, but in some ways more rewarding and fun part is figuring out how to truly have the support or CX function be in the fabric of the larger organization to actually
yes.
be considered equals and not, the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak. Or I had one of my favorite direct reports from the last few years. If she ever hears this, she'll be chuckling, but she called herself the queen of the garbage dump. So when I
Ooh,
started at this company, we were just chatting. She's like, that's me. I'm like, everybody loves you. She's like, oh, sure they do. I'm the queen of the dump. I'm the queen of the garbage dump. Um, a lot of what I think we're rebelling against are nowadays when I take on an advising gig and if, I'm doing like an audit and all of this, we're trying to fight against that, right? The support or CX function is not meant to be an island. It's certainly not meant to be the garbage dump, but it is sometimes the reality. There's sometimes some truth to that. And these really interesting scenarios develop, or I think, especially with really proud, like think hardworking leaders like you for sure, like think myself too. Sometimes you have the CX function, factually speaking, is the lowest paid in the organization. In some ways, is kind of at the bottom of that structure or, like power structure or whatnot. And yet at the same time, I've always taken a lot of pride in my team should at the same time be number one in terms of engagement scores and employee satisfaction. Why does that occur? I mean, well, you could say like one point could be that we on CX are kind of a self-selected group and we're energetic and we're optimistic. And so is it like an easier battle to get to those engagement scores? I always like to acknowledge perspectives like that. I don't know, maybe there's some truth to that. But I also think that you do have a lot of really resilience and very people and culture focused leaders in CX. And
Yes.
so, I mean, I'll say something audacious, which is I have actually found across my whole business career that companies that are more the customer centric, we say really commonly. But if you take that a step further, a slightly different take, and companies, so founders, CEOs, C suites who are deeply aligned with a strong CX leader, I bet it could be proven out that those businesses actually do better. It's hard to be a CX leader and to have the community that we have to kind of roll with the people that we roll with and not think almost obsessively about our people and about management and about toxicity of workplace, to have that level of awareness and passion and care. So I could say across 20 years of leading departments, where there are days or weeks or months, or, maybe there were aspects of the department, the team I was leading that were negative, that were toxic. I'm sure, like I'm absolutely sure. But I think the difference between one leader and another leader is someone who is hyper aware of that, who holds themselves accountable, and who looks at that as kind of a rally cry of like, next month shall be better. My people deserve better. Or do you
Yes.
kind of just turn a blind eye and be like, what the heck am I supposed to do? I'm not the one running the business anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. I do believe that that's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have I think one of the things from my career in like last few years of career that's kind of embarrassing and is an admission, because we talked about red flags, and I want to get your perspective and your guidance on that more. But I just want to fess up to you and any listeners that I have the distinction of taking a job, fairly recently in my career where there were all kinds of red flags from the first interview to, you know, pre day one and aligning with my soon to be manager. And I was seeing at least pink flags, if not bright red flags. And I was ignoring them because I wanted to. I was seeing things through a certain filter because there were aspects of the opportunity that were really attractive to me. And I wanted to just force and like bully it through to be the exact experience that I wanted. And there were aspects of the role that seemed prestigious to me. I thought it would be fun and kind of a feather in my cap, paid really well, right? That's hard to look past. But I saw
Yes.
the red flags and I ignored them. And so then 6 months and 12 months later, when any of us are going like, wow, this actually is toxic and is a really hard experience, I kind of hold myself accountable in a way. But I think it's an interesting thing that's not always talked about or sort of admitted. Do we sometimes see the red flags and just choose to sort of blow past them?
Yeah. Or is there also this moment where we see something, and again, I think as career CXers, right? I mean, that's really where
Yeah.
we built our time and
Hmm.
space. We're like, but I can fix it.
Right.
Like
Right.
I can fix this thing because that's what I'm good
Mm,
at, right? I'm good at taking a negative experience and
mm,
turning it around for somebody,
mm,
because that's really where we are so prideful, and that's why we have done so well in our careers. I mean, I tongue in cheek call myself a fixer. Organizations bring me in when they went through like oh, well, we just hired a warm body, and they like to talk to customers, and
mm,
now we're in this mess. And I'm like, yeah, it's because you didn't hire somebody. I tell people, I beat that drum as often as I can. I'm like, stop hiring just like the person who was good at the job. Like, bring somebody in who knows what they're talking about. And so I kind of refer to myself as a fixer. I
mm.
actually refer to myself as Mary Poppins. There's a lot of
Of course you
reasons
do.
there.
Wait,
Well,
because you
because
had
kind of
because of the umbrella?
that, and I also kind of blow in. So I blow in and I come in and I do the things, and then I just kind of leave on the wind, right? Like I
Oh
just
my
kind of
gosh, that's
go.
so interesting. I kind of relate. I relate to that a little bit too. Yeah.
And I actually believe like really good career CXers are probably in that space where it's just like we come in, we fix the things, but we really do need a challenge and we really do need like to be able to see something going forward and making the changes. And so I do think like we might see the red flags and we might actually celebrate them
Yeah, that's
because
so
we're like,
interesting.
oh,
I'm very
this is,
needed. I'm going to feel like the white hot pain and just so needed, from day one,
yeah,
which we like.
right.
And
And
I know
that
CX
probably
arts
feeds
too.
whatever like drama or like whatever we need. I always say I live a really low drama life because I work in a really high drama space. And maybe
Mhm.
that's like it feeds that piece of our soul.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm kind of feeling like the dots connecting different, really interesting points that you brought up. You mentioned before, again, going back to leaders leaving a business early potentially. And what I was thinking about is during interview process, I think on average, most companies and leaders probably do a good job of doing interview process, acknowledging their weak points, and that nowadays because people talk so much and there's like Glassdoor and a million other sites. And so leadership is generally aware of what those weak points might be in terms of their employee reputation. And so maybe they talk a big game in the interviews of like, hey, we're aware of that, or like, look, we kind of had a low point or, down, but we're looking to fix it. And so, to your point, it's a common refrain in leadership interviews, acknowledging those weak points. And we want you to come in and help to be the change and like help to usher in the new era. And then, I think there's more variance is whether the organization actually was ready for that. Be it the founder. I think both of us have worked in a lot of founder led businesses, which I would still say to this day I love. And it's just one of those situations. There's a lot of advantages, and then there's some typical challenges as well. And so one of them in a founder led business is oftentimes that the founder really holds on to those original pieces of culture, what their original vision was. And so that's why you might have a leader join, and then they're 2 months or 4 months in, or like, yeah, you're right, Lynda. In my case, there was a sense I took the job, and the hiring manager, who continued to be my direct manager, told me, well, we're going to have this great partnership because I could tell that you have these strengths and I have these strengths, and I could really learn from you and you could learn from me, and we're going to do this together as a partnership. And I guess that's sort of the story that I let myself get sold by, and it didn't feel that way in reality. Um, so I think there's a lot there, and I'm curious from your end, when you talk to somebody and they're in seat at a job and they're starting to see some of these red flags, like maybe when you read out that list, yeah, we were both saying that for us, we were almost twitching thinking about career experiences. So probably somebody else listening might have felt that way. Like, yeah, 8 out of 10, boom, that's like a place that I work. I don't know. How do you coach people through that? Is it necessarily like you got to get out of there, tomorrow, or is it more nuanced sometimes? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first and foremost, we need to recognize that toxic cultures are only changed when it's again it's trickle down. So when the people at the top recognize that a culture change there needs to be a shift in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so because if it's trickle down, right, which means it comes from the top and it just reaches everybody, right? If that's the case, then no matter how much upwards pressure you put, no matter how much you're trying to protect your team, no matter how much you're trying to come in and affect change,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not being driven at the top,
Mm-hmm.
this is a scenario that you figure out how to survive or how to leave. And again, when I think about experiences that I've had one where I survived it and I went away from it. I walked away like feeling really, really positive. And then as I started to unpack things, I was like, oh, wow,
Mm-hmm.
my behavior was more affected than I actually thought that it was. Right. So that was a case of where I really kind of just survived it. And again, I felt very blessed in the sense of, and I don't use that term very lightly. But I do feel like I had some shelter. Right. So I had some shelter. I had somebody who was protecting me, but then I also felt like I was able and I was empowered enough to like protect my people from that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a case of survival. And when I came out of that, I was just like, I remember sitting in a meeting. I'm like, wait, we talk about these things? We're allowed to talk about this? I oh. we're allowed to talk about like the company performance. This is bonkers. Or we're allowed to talk about like how do we fix something versus finger pointing.
Mm,
I was very, very shocked.
mm,
And I still sometimes like, whew, like wipe the brow and just go,
yeah.
that was amazing. Right. But then the next scenario that I had where I was in a really toxic work environment, that was someplace where I did my best to survive. I did everything that I could to survive. And I think when we think about survival, it's about how do I change my behavior? How can I show up differently? How can I show up better? How can I action this feedback in a meaningful way? Right. And I would say, like, one thing that's always been on my mind, Joe, and I don't know if you remember this, in one of our first reviews that you wrote
Hmm.
for me,
Hmm.
which we're going to have to unpack that journey someday.
I'm sure it was very
Um,
long. I could assure you of that.
it was
Very
very long.
verbose.
It was very long. Um, in one of the things you said like Lynda's got really thick skin.
Hmm.
You're like, Lynda, I have to, and we talked about it in my review. You're like, Lynda, I really want to talk about like, you are very thick skinned. You take really tough feedback, you action it, and then you figure out how to make it work.
Yeah,
Right.
which I really admired. Hmm.
And I appreciate that. And that has always been something that has stuck with me. And so when I found myself in an environment that, as I was really kind of unpacking and I was seeing a lot of this classic behavior of a toxic workplace, I was constantly like, okay, what feedback do you have for me? How can I change? Like, what can I
Hmm.
do differently? What can I do better? How can I show up in a way that like is going to work better for the team or work better for you? And I was and that's where I started to lose that sense of reality, right? Like I was really like, I don't even know what is going on, and I was making myself physically ill.
Hmm.
And that's where you start to say, and ultimately I quit that job without a plan, without anything, without having any understanding of how I was going to go forward, because I could not survive it any longer. So when I talk to people about toxic workplaces and we talk about like where they're sitting in their career or what their next
Hmm.
steps are or what those things are, it's like you survive it
Mm.
or you leave it.
Interesting.
Um, and sometimes survival is watching like the writing on the wall and seeing like, okay, I see that these executives who I know are toxic are going to be maybe pushed out by the board. Or I understand that like we have a new CEO and this new CEO seems to be a new breath of life. So I'm going to see if like these people are filtered through, right?
Hmm.
Or there's times where you just have to say like, I'm physically ill.
Mm.
I was losing my hair, Joe. My
Yeah.
hair was coming out. I was sick I was having panic attacks, and that's not a thing. Fortunately, it's not a thing that I've ever experienced. And I was having
Hmm.
these experiences before work. And that's a moment where you just have to cut.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I'm glad that you took the conversation there. My mind was going a similar direction. I think it's helpful and honest to talk about the toll that really toxic jobs and workplaces and managers specifically could take on us. And maybe that's part of the sort of unspoken advice that people give each other, or that I would give to somebody is, because you're thinking about how long to stick out a situation like that. Some of it, to your point, is the reason for hope, is the reason to think that this could change in the foreseeable future. Inevitably, there is sometimes, the math of how is this role benefiting my career? How would it look if I left too early? I think both of us would probably, in general, caution against that thinking because you end up sticking around with a bad situation for too long. But I think we should also be realists that, of course, that sort of, logic or math, like it runs through all of our minds. But I think that another thing to factor in is just like how much of a toll is it taking on you personally? And that's something that there's no longer like a formula for that. There's not even a right and wrong answer. It's just how much of a toll is it taking on you. And so to your point, yeah, there were any number of situations I found myself in earlier in my career where again, like for whatever combination of a million reasons, I was able to more so laugh it off or just keep up that wall or that feeling of accountability and like, yeah, that feels tough, but you know what? I'm sure that I could do something to fix it and like it's all good. And yeah, like recent job experience for me too was getting to the point where it was 1,000% impacting my mental health, other parts of my life that I just hold so dear and sacred, like time with my family. I was like, if you think about these things that should be more nuanced of like, is it impacting that side of your life? Are you still showing up for your family? In my case, it started to be absolutely not. Like,
Yeah.
hard no. I am in a terrible mood at night. I can't really fully tune in with my kids. First of all, because I'm getting slacked by my boss at 7, 8, 9, 10 p.m. But second of all, just because of sort of the trauma of the day. And that's something that I learned. One of the things I've thought about like a couple of times with this podcast, we talk a lot about like real talk. And I also think about maybe like little lessons I've learned and being in a slightly more privileged kind of position, and maybe not everyone's having that benefit. So for example, during my last job, and maybe not coincidentally, and I don't say this to evoke a laugh or anything, but I did decide to start therapy, a regular therapy, for the first time in my life. Now, I'm actually a huge advocate, especially having found a great therapist. And it's not cheap. And that's what I mean about like, it's not cheap. And this is a problem. I wish that really high quality therapy was more readily available to everybody. But it's an investment I continue to make. And again, I think it's probably a positive thing at the end of the day for most people. But at the same time, is it a wild coincidence that I felt compelled to seek out a therapist and start therapy at my last job? No, actually, like all jokes aside, probably not. And when I got on the other side of that experience, um, something I kind of unpacked with her was that I was feeling really embarrassed about thinking about something from my professional life as being traumatic. And I kind of just spilled this out to her, and I said, like, oh my God, with all like the horrible things happening in the world and how lucky and privileged I am in my lot in life. And like, this isn't real trauma. Nobody died, right? Like we say that a lot, like nobody died. She helped me to understand. She's like, no, I don't, with all respect, I don't think that's correct. I think that things from our careers, our work world, a toxic boss, a toxic job, things ending in a really disappointing way, as I experienced for the first time in my career, not having a feeling of helplessness,
Yeah.
that those things actually could be genuinely personally traumatic, and allowing ourselves that space and allowing ourselves to take some time to actually call it such and heal from that trauma is huge. And now, kind of me myself feeling on the other side of that process of allowing myself to think of it that way, doing some healing and soul searching. Boy, it was a really powerful experience. I'm in a much better headspace now, and I look back and I'm like, I was in a bad place there.
I completely agree with what your therapist said, and I do think that because what it does first and foremost, and one of the things I work with my clients a lot on is we so much in the culture that we or the work culture that we are in, we associate what we do with who we are. And really like let
Mm,
that sit in for a minute
yep.
because what's the first thing when you ask someone when you meet them?
Always that thing of what do you do?
What do you do? What do you like? Because for some reason, we have put so much emphasis on what it is that we do. And so we identify so closely with what we do for work with who we are.
Hmm.
And when I'm talking to somebody who's in a toxic work culture, we talk a lot about like how can you disassociate, like how can you detach from your work, and how can you start looking at work as something that you do, not something that of who you are, right? And that is, I think, so often how we can and this is a tactic to survive workplaces, just going like, well, I care so deeply and they don't care. And I say, okay, then it's time for you to stop caring. Like your leadership has shown you that
Hmm.
they don't put as much stock into this, and so you need to toe the line with this, like
Yeah.
follow suit. um, and so, but it's so difficult, especially when I'm working with high performers who are like, but I could make it better. And I was in that boat, right? Like I felt that same way. I'm like, I can change. I can do this differently. I can do it better. To the point where for me, I was changing my boundaries, which I
Hmm.
think Joe, you would probably agree with me. I'm pretty good with boundaries.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
one of the boundaries that I have is like if you're on PTO, you don't work.
Yeah,
Right? That is your protected time.
hard agree.
I was living in Argentina. And this is the first time I had lived outside of the country with my family. I was living in Argentina. We had finally gotten someone to come visit us. I don't know why nobody came to visit us, but we finally had people come visit us. And I was I was touring around the country with my mom, right? We were doing things. And there is the most beautiful cemetery in the world is the Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires. And it is the coolest. I mean, it is a feat to behold, right? It
Mm-hmm.
is so cool. And I was literally walking around the cemetery on my phone on
Mm-hmm.
Slack,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I would never let anybody who reported to me do. I would never. I mean, I would, if somebody was on PTO, I would say, hey, listen, you might get slacks from me, but it's not, there's zero expectation for you to respond. In fact, if you respond, I'm going to get frustrated with you. I'm like, it's probably just a brain dump for me. So I need you to understand, like, do not respond to me on your vacation. Like, your time is your time. Please go spend the time. I am doing something I'd never done in my life, which was live in another country.
Mm-hmm.
I was touring like one of the coolest sites in, well, I mean, Buenos Aires is very cool, but
Love
there
it.
was
Yeah.
like, it was so cool. And I was on my phone slacking
Yep.
my boss. And I just thought, like, how did I get to this point? How did I lower my boundaries so much? And that was, again, one of those things that was just like one of the nails in the coffin for me at that job, where I was just like, how did I, and this person was asking me to do stuff that didn't matter.
That's what I was going to mention next. Yeah. I was going to say, that hearing that from you is really powerful. It really resonates with me. And yet, to that exact point, it made me think about the word that you used before, performative, and that being a, kind of a trait of a toxic workplace. I was thinking about my version of that story, pretty recent times. And I was with my family. I was with not only my immediate family, my wife and kids, but another family of best friends. And we had been trying to plan out this weekend really for years, it would be fair to say. And we were just finally doing the thing. We were finally in the moment of just, the kids are around, we want to break bread together and just catch up as life friends. And like, I think we all agree, like that's what life's about, is like moments like that. I spent much of that weekend, laptop open, working. And the problem, hypothetically, that could still be okay, right? If it's coming from a place of empowerment, or this business that I really care about is going through a tough moment and like I want to step up. Exact opposite. It was pressured, to feeling like I had to do that, and even being in an executive role, let alone how other people in the company must have felt. And if you kind of unwind, like, why did we get to a moment where people who had already poured their heart and soul out Monday through Friday are now spending their whole holiday weekends, laptop open? Um, in this case, I remember back, to sharing, it was part of it was the CEO sent an email to the entire customer base right before the holiday weekend. And if you play it out further, I had raised feedback to my boss of, hey, I actually I don't really see a big benefit of doing that. Like, I don't know where you think the ROI on that decision is going to be, and it's going to be really, really painful for me and the team. So maybe let's wait till Monday or Tuesday, kind of thing. And the response I got back that was very telling is, yeah, but for their boss, who is the CEO, it's going to make them happy. And like, it's something that they want. It's going to make them happy. We just got to suck it up. Like, you have to suck it up. Everyone has to suck it up because we think it's going to make that one human being happy, or kind of stroke something for them. That for me, like the combination of all of that, to your point, that was one of my lines in the sand where things kind of changed after that, for me in that job. And I guess kind of my career as well, what I was willing to deal with. And Lynn, I know for me, and I don't know if there's like any last one or point that you'd want to highlight. I know one for me that, again, your list really resonated with me before. You were talking about blame and the way that, if there's mistakes, because there's mistakes every freaking day. I've never worked a day in my life that I make many
Constantly. Yeah.
mistakes. And so I think that, again, that is absolutely a barometer of a healthy workplace or not, to acknowledge that and celebrate that and go, hey, we're all human. Like, we're striving for perfection, which, as we've said, I could be a tough boss in the standpoint of I'm striving for perfection, but I'm also hyper, where I'm making many mistakes per day. We're human. So let's kind of celebrate that aspect too. And it's never about who made the mistake and finger pointing. It's just, let's move forward together. And if there's something to be learned from it, let's do that, but move forward. And I think an interesting thing too is, if you look at the opposite of blame, there's credit. And this is something
Yeah.
that I had opportunity and motivation to think about a lot. One of my recent career stops. I think that's another one of those barometers for me. It's one of the most obvious things in management is you take the blame, you take the hit. Like you're the head coach, right? You're getting
Yes.
paid the big bucks. You take all the blame, and when there's credit to be doled out, it's just one of the most obvious tenets, like management tenets imaginable. You try to dole that credit out, one, to the people who really deserve it and did the hardest work, and two, to the people who could benefit the most from that credit. And it might actually be impactful to their profile in the company and their career path. And when you encounter, as I feel like I did recently, the opposite of that, it's so jarring, and it almost just like I could barely compute it. I just like stopped dead in my tracks. But senior leaders who are actually gobbling up the credit and just
Yes.
kind of like quietly, selfishly hoarding it, and then you realize that that's happening. That is, I think, empowerment is such a key aspect of a workplace being healthy or toxic. And that kind of behavior is the exact opposite of empowerment. And it's making everyone on that team or organization feel, disempowered, demotivated, honestly, just like sick, like ill. And last point is that's what one of my old mentors taught me. And I mentioned this on a call recently with someone who's struggling at her job, and it resonated with her. Um, I had an old mentor. I was like on my way out of a given company. We were chatting. She's like, "Oh my God, how did I get there?" And we're kind of talking about things honestly. And she's like, "Oh my God, so you were feeling sick and you're beating yourself up. You're wondering, why did I not rise to the occasion better and change everything? But you were feeling sick." And so she said, like, if you wake up and you have the flu, would you expect yourself to climb a mountain that day? No, you'd be forgiving to yourself. I'm feeling sick. And so anyway, got to reel myself in here and throw a lot at you to respond to. But I think that whole concept of blame and then also how credit is doled out is
Yes.
really powerful and gets right to the heart of things.
Yeah. And you do see so much of that in toxic cultures where it is, where you're like, wait, but I did this, right? And I do think that there are so many moments in our career where we will do a thing and it's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't get the credit that we think we should get, right? We don't get the credit that we get. But at some point in time, we're like, oh, but at least it's done. Like, okay, fine. And like, I don't need a cheering section all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's fine. Like, I think that this is a big deal, but whatever, fine. Like, at least it's done. And at least the task is off my plate. And I think so many good, strong leaders will just be like, you know, I'm just glad that the task is off my plate or that we don't have this issue any longer. And no, I really didn't get the shout out that I think I should have gotten.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but, you know, it's fine. And I think so often, again, it's that slipping of boundaries. It's that slipping of saying, like, oh, you know, I guess it's okay. Like, you know, it's fine. And what we do, I think so often, and I bet that this was your reaction as well, we then almost overcompensate with our teams and we turn
Mm-hmm.
around to our
Mm-hmm.
team and we're just like, you guys are so amazing. Yeah, nobody gave a shit, but you are so amazing and you
Yeah.
did the thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
100%.
and so I do, and again, it's that slipping of boundaries. It's that slipping of, oh, well, okay, you know, and it's recognizing the pattern and seeing the
Mm-hmm.
pattern. And one thing for those and for those in the audience who are like, well, how do I start to tell? How do I start to know if I am slipping my boundaries? Because I think it's, you know, I tell people all of the time the boiling of the frog story.
Do
Oh, do
tell.
you not know the
No.
boiling of the frog story? How do you boil a frog? Well, you can't just drop a frog into hot water because the
Can you
frog will
tell
just.
this whole situation is making me uncomfortable. I feel so bad for the frog. Please
I know you do.
continue.
I know you do. But you don't just drop the frog in hot water because the frog is good at jumping and can jump far distances and they're going to jump out, right? So you put a frog in comfortable water, right? And you just turn up the degree on the temperature over time.
Oh my gosh, Linda, you really have a
That is
gift.
how
This is
that is how
horrifying.
you boil a frog. So I use this analogy a lot for work.
Mm.
I've never actually boiled a frog for those in the audience. I have not boiled a frog,
See
but
one
if
in the
I,
background right now.
I know it's
Just
just
kidding.
back there. But that's how we lose our boundaries. That's how things
No, that's
slip. That's
powerful.
how
Yeah.
we find ourselves in these situations, right? We
Hmm.
ignored the red flags, or we thought we could fix the red flags. We get in, and then we assimilate. And it's the water is getting turned up degree over degree over degree. And suddenly we're cooked, as my children would say.
Hmm.
So that is the way that you find yourself. And so many people are like, well, how do I avoid that? Or how do I not allow those things, or things start to feel off? How do I not let it feel normal? And the thing I think that the biggest takeaway for this and for the people in the audience is it's time for you to start creating documents, like documentation trail,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And the thing that I advise my clients on so often is I'm like, your boss is documenting everything. You should be doing the
Hmm.
same thing, because nobody has your back. And this is so sad, right? But nobody's going to protect you the way you are going to protect you, because
Hmm.
that's our survival instinct.
Hmm.
And so it's really crucial for people to start. If you are starting to feel a way, or you're starting to notice certain things, write it down. Dates, times, what's happening, what was said to you. Start doing those things. And if it's not a situation where you're dealing with a toxic boss, like where it's overt, right? I could tell you all kinds of stories about the one that really pushed me over the edge. And it was very overt, right? The things that were happening were very, very obvious and unsettling. But it might not be things that you immediately identify, or maybe it is a slipping of the boundary, or maybe it is oh, but you're so valuable, we need you to respond on your PTO. Like maybe it's those things.
Hmm.
It's so crucial for people to start writing it down, because you could have a feeling, and depending on your personality and how you address things, like I'm the type of person, I feel something very deeply, and then I really kind of move on.
Hmm.
Like I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of over that, which is where I find that my boundaries will slip, because
Hmm.
they're boiling the frog, right?
Yep.
But you could have a person on the other end who you offend them one time and nothing is ever right again, right? So it can help you find, and back to the gaslighting, it helps you find a foot in reality. It helps you identify, is this a real scenario? Or is this something that I've manufactured in my mind? Or is this something where I have let it go on for far too long?
Hmm.
So that would be the advice that I would give to anybody who is consuming this podcast, is it's time for you to start creating a journal. Like just journal it, put it in notes in your phone, voice memos, like however you want to do it. But
Hmm.
it's really crucial, if you're starting to feel a certain way, that you recognize that and write it down,
Hmm.
so you can then say really objectively. Because if you're somebody who has let your boundaries slip, or you find yourself where you're like, how did I end up in this situation? Like, why do I feel this? Why is my hair falling out? Like, why do I feel this way? It's a way for you to go back and go, oh,
Hmm.
I can see what's happened. I can see literally the writing
Yep.
on the wall. So I would advise people to do that.
I agree with that fully. And I think to build on that point, it's something worth considering also to bring your concerns to the HR or people team, which is a really loaded topic, right? And you might be fearful that it's going to really blow things up for you at work and not be received well. I think it also gets back to what you want to get out of the situation, but especially if you're somewhere where you're seeing signs of a toxic workplace, um, you're feeling it. You feel like might be abused in the workplace or whatnot. But if you do want to stay, ideally, you just want to shake things up or not report to that manager, you want to see the organization get better, you have to at least consider taking your concerns to the people or HR team. Because to your point, if you're not, as messy and as intimidating as that might be, it's very possible that the people HR team is only getting the other side of the story
Yes.
about your performance, your team's performance, etc. And so, if you decide to share your concerns, when things are too kind of foregone, like the moment has passed. Now, maybe it still brings some of the benefits that you were alluding to in terms of feeling clarity and empowered and kind of, getting through it and from a mental health standpoint and whatnot. So those are real, very important. But again, if you're looking to stay at that workplace and actually change things or maybe stick it out past your current manager report arrangement, you have to at least consider that, right? but it's
Yes.
tricky.
Yes.
It's tricky.
But you still have to come with a paper trail.
Yep. Oh,
Uh,
100%. It can't
and
just
I
be, I
talk a
felt
lot
this way.
about
My
that.
opinion is
Yeah.
that. It's got to be
Yeah.
facts and paper trail. I agree.
Because sadly, the burden of proof will always sit on your shoulders. The
Basically,
burden of
whoever is
proof.
more junior in the room.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and sadly, that's the case in everything in life. Oftentimes, the victim has to be the one who shows the receipts.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just the way that it works. If you are going to make a claim that goes against what the norm is or what people think, if you just are like, well, this is how I feel, they're like, okay, well, how do we know your feelings are valid? Or how do we know this is really a thing? Which again boils down to writing it down. And I get a lot of pushback of like, well, then it's like a they said situation. And I'm like, yeah, but if you have enough things, like if you have enough evidence or you have enough instances, it's harder to dispute, number one. Also, if it's pervasive enough and it requires an investigation, other people through their storytelling will validate what you're saying. So again, it's just so crucial. And again, if we're living in a world where we are our own advocates, everything you do is documented on
Hmm.
some level. The way you sign into your computer, the time you do it, like what you look at, like everything is documented. So you should have a paper trail as well.
Agreed. For once, I have nothing to add.
Wow. Well, I feel like that's the end then. Like if we got there, like I
That's it.
think that we've unpacked toxic workplaces. We've talked about the things. So I guess that brings us to the end. Um, anything that's bugged you this week? I not to close on a negative note, but let's talk about like, I always have like some kind of PSA about something that's like burning me up. So Joe, anything you want to share with the people?
Oh wow, that's amazing. I wasn't ready for this one. Something, and it's probably even more in my current life or my current role as more of an advisor, consultant. So I'm always kind of in different worlds, on the same day, this company, this industry, that one, and I'm doing both consumer facing and business facing. And so I love it. That's a lot of what drew me to this setup. I will say one thing that comes up a lot in this chapter of life is fits and starts, or other people being super duper urgent on something and then completely falling back, and
Yes.
maybe not always realizing if you're coming to somebody in a professional setting, probably just life too, but let's just keep it to a professional setting. You're saying, hey, this is really urgent. Can you have this ready for tomorrow? Can I meet with that person by tomorrow? Always keep in mind there might be a lot of hustle that's taking place, immediately following that and impacting different people's work days and lives. And then sometimes I get, a person kind of backs away from the scene after that, doesn't reply, or is like, we could just do next week. I'm like, oh, sure, we can totally do next week. I just called in like four favors though to do it today. So I wasn't expecting to be prompted to vent. Maybe Lynda, you knew because you're operating on such the next level. That was sort of, this episode has been like, I really hope it's helpful for someone out there because it was a little bit of a load, like an effort to sort of get through again. So maybe it's like what the doctor ordered, to just do a little good old fashioned venting at the end. So I thank you for that, partner. What's how about for you? What's on your mind?
So my closing advice for the group
Hmm.
is going to be stop treating LinkedIn like Facebook. Um,
Interesting.
I appreciate updates. I appreciate, and listen, we're all humans. I mean, we're talking about the business of humans and trying to find humanity in the workplace. I'm all about that. But I don't want to see a GoFundMe for your wedding on LinkedIn.
Oh
That is
wow.
not the appropriate place to
Mm.
put a GoFundMe. Um, yeah, it's gross. Stop doing it. Also, I get the things, and it's like I watched. I saw something the other day that's like proud girl dad moment, and it's like giving an update on their kid's performance and like a play, and I'm
Hmm.
like, that is so great. I don't care. Like
Lynda.
I don't care on LinkedIn. I don't want that on my feed in LinkedIn. That is a Facebook moment. That's an
This is
Instagram
why I
moment.
love being your friend.
Like,
Very
these are not.
strong stance on a hot button topic. I have read very long and compelling LinkedIn posts, not only sharing the proud girl dad moment, but then explaining and arguing with conviction and detail why it was so appropriate, why it was like extra, extra, extra appropriate for LinkedIn. We have to figure out whose post that was that I'm vaguely recalling. We should have them come on the podcast and you two should just duke it out.
I would love to have them defend that moment because I would say, nope, nope. And I know, because in this digital world, in this world where we're connected, you're like, but I would share this update at work and I would say nobody at work cared either. Like, they didn't care either.
We
It's like,
noted.
back in the, because I'm old enough to remember like the digital slide decks, like the Rolodex, like the round thing, and you would watch and people would have you come over and look at their vacation from Greece, and you're just like, there's
Yeah.
not enough alcohol in the world to make me care about this. I
Or
feel the
maybe
same way
like
about
maybe
those
their
LinkedIn
2 year old's
posts.
going through potty training
Yeah,
and they're like, my kid had the best poop yesterday. And you're like, I'm
outstanding.
rooting
I
for
don't
you.
care.
Okay, so if anyone's ever listening to this and they want to represent the other side of that argument, hit us up.
Yeah,
Maybe you can
please.
jump on a future episode of the pod.
Yeah. And like,
I'll
here's the thing that
deeply
makes
sit
me sound
back and
so
watch.
unfeeling and uncaring. I do care about humans. I do care about those things. I just don't think that that's an appropriate venue for those conversations.
Amazing. Well, if Linda says, then that's
That's my
gospel then.
hashtag. Hashtag Linda says.
That's what Linda says. I'm a believer. All
Okay.
right. Well,
Well,
on that
everyone,
note,
thanks for sticking with us.
thanks, Linda, as always. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Joe.